the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here, and I really hope that you've been enjoying the conversations that you've been listening to, and hopefully finding some tips, some next steps that you can take if you struggle with similar feelings of self-doubt, which obviously, as you're hearing, are fairly universal. This is something that we all go through from time to time. When I started this podcast, my goal was really to try to normalize the experience, to let everybody know that you are not alone, that there's a name for what you're feeling, and that there are steps that we can be taking to manage it more effectively. What I have found over the course of these conversations has been fascinating. I have had an absolutely powerful and different conversation with every single person who I have interviewed. I worried at one point that there may not be enough to talk about. How much is there to say about imposter syndrome? Are the stories going to start to get repetitive? That has absolutely not been the case. Everyone brings a fascinating new perspective to this conversation. I have learned something from every discussion that we've had. I hope you have too. I want to make a note that many of these recordings are being done during the social distancing that's happening with coronavirus. I am doing my best to protect the sound quality, but we are all in homes that have pets, kids, all kinds of background noise going on. For me, it's much more important to share with you a very natural conversation between two people than it is to share a perfectly polished recording. So I hope that you will bear with us if there are moments where the sound is not perfect. Really, my goal is to share stories, not to provide perfectly scripted, perfectly polished audio. So apologies for any imperfections that may be coming through in the recordings, but I'm hoping that you're getting the essence of the message regardless. So thank you again for being here. I wish you all the best and hope that you will consider sharing your own story one day. Thanks again. Welcome, Cece. I'm really excited to have you here today. Before we jump into the conversation, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Cece. I am currently a community catalyzer for a green tech company that's just starting up. I'm also a health and wellness advisor and consultant. And I basically play with food and encourage people to be in their optimal state of health and wellness.
I like that way you say that, play with food. I'm sure that's very intriguing to a lot of people. So I'd love to start by asking you the general question that I start with every time, which is, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? How, if at all, has it shown up in your life or in your career?
So imposter syndrome to me is maybe feeling that you're not what you are in some capacity or another. So maybe questioning your own capabilities, questioning your own qualifications, and having this sense of maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe I don't know enough, or maybe I'm not qualified enough. And all of these questions that center around the enough factor, questioning our own self-worth and our own value. And so for me, that's come up a lot in my life because I was a child that would bring home an A, and the question would be, why wasn't it an A+? And so I guess from an early age, I had this psychological thought pattern develop that was, no matter what I do, no matter how much I learn, it's maybe not going to be enough.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is definitely one of the key triggers of imposter syndrome. And I talk a lot about the early childhood influences, and it really seems to be the people who were given overwhelming praise as children and told how wonderful and perfect they are. And then people on the opposite end of the spectrum, as you're describing, who feel like no matter what I do, it's not enough. And it's
it's hard for parents because obviously like it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. But I can imagine how difficult that must have been for you growing up. Can you give any examples of a time when imposter syndrome showed up for you?
Sure. So when I came out of university, I was offered a job that the pay to me looked too high. The title to me looked, too unbelievable to be true. The whole scenario that was sitting on a piece of paper as I was about to sign just seemed out of my reach. And I asked the man who was interviewing me, questions that I look back on and, with more confidence, I guess, through the years. And I basically asked him, why me? Like, are you sure that I'm capable of handling this? And I remember that being the ringing question in my head. And, to be honest, and I hope that this helps somebody listening, to be honest, it frightened me so much that I ran from it. And I went to Europe and I traveled. And the whole time this man was emailing me, asking me when I was going to get back and setting everything into motion for me to accept the offer when I got back from my trip. And in the end, I didn't take the job. I didn't think that it was, I guess, like, to be completely blunt, I just didn't think that it was real. I didn't think that I could come out of university and deserve that.
Wow. How do you feel reflecting back on that? What did that moment do for you in the whole scheme of things?
Well, I'm very optimistic about how life seems to roll along with the way that it's meant to go. So I know that if I would have chosen to be in my power at that moment and thought differently, maybe I deserve this. Yes, this is, part of my path. I have earned this, or whatever positive affirmations I could have given to myself then I wouldn't end up here. But, with the mentality I have now, of course, if that situation were to come up for me now, it would be a whole different story. I do look back and sympathize with myself because I feel and I see and I can re-experience the traumas that were holding me back at that moment. But I do think that it taught me resiliency because now I know what it's like to have to overpower through that and, make something else come from the circumstance.
I love that you say that you look back and sympathize, because I think so many of us look back and beat ourselves up. And at that moment, that fear was really real for you. That the beliefs that were attached to that situation were real in your mind. And you made the decision based on where you were at that moment in your life. And so I think it's great that you recognize it as an important moment in this journey that we're all on, right? But that you're not looking back on it through a lens of bitterness or through a lens of self-criticism.
You're right. I think that's, looking back is a little bit difficult because then it doesn't allow us to be in now. And we've learned so much to get us to now. So it's hard to ever punish ourselves for doing something with a backward step where we didn't know what we know now. And I'm very, very, very committed and passionate about health and wellness because I believe that empowers us to make better choices as well. And I know, looking back, that I was very unhealthy at the time. So I can't blame myself for not being able to make a healthy, conscious, and confident decision.
So how has transitioning to more of a focus on health and wellness affected your confidence, affected your experience with self-doubt and imposter syndrome?
Well, for one, mental clarity is huge. So a lot of people that are experiencing various health problems, diseases, or even just discomforts in the body, they experience brain fog or memory loss, or, just even cognitive disability in small amounts. And I found that through my own health evolution, I've expanded my mind up so much. So at that time, I know that I was serving and bartending as a part-time job, and I would forget the order. So, somebody would tell me what they wanted for their dinner, and I would walk away from the table and I would think, oh no, what did they say they wanted? And how I'm going to have to go back and ask them. And so that was really impairing my life. And so that's one thing that was huge for me, is just getting my mental state back.
Wow. And do you find in the course of your everyday life now that you are faced with moments of self-doubt, maybe not at the same level that you described from earlier in your career, but I always think of imposter syndrome as something that we don't cure. We just learn how to better manage. Right? So how does it show up for you today versus maybe years ago in the scenario that you initially described for us?
Yeah, I love that you say that, because I think it takes a lot of mental, psychological work to get yourself out of that way of thinking, especially if it's been with you developing since childhood. And for me, what I guess it's probably a lot to do with my mindfulness training and all of the health that I have entered into. But I no longer see it as my syndrome or something that I'm experiencing. But what I do experience is people, okay, so my perception, like what I view people putting on to me. So what I mean by that is that sometimes I will feel judged, and that does come back to me. But, certain people might say, oh, are you qualified for that? Or are you sure that you've done enough research? Or how can you give somebody that advice? Like, who are you to tell them that that's the correct path for them? These kind of things. And those trigger questions or aggressive tones. Usually they might trigger that in my head, where sometimes I will think, it's the moment where, and I've done a lot of work. I want to say I've done a lot of work on this, but I know that what I'm doing is based off of an inner love and passion. And so that kind of overpowers that. So if I ever were to feel that I myself felt uneasy in my shoes, or that someone else didn't think that I belonged there, then I come back to my heart and my passion and say, well, you know what? Everybody is on their path. Everybody is learning. Like, no one is inherently objectively correct in their stance. And if I'm doing the best I can in true heart center, then that's the best that I can do. And if I'm doing the best that I can do, then I can't be an imposter.
I love that. I think that's such a great way to think about it. And as you're talking, I'm sort of processing how this applies to people who are in a more traditional work environment where maybe they're not feeling the same kind of heart-based attachment to what they're doing. But I think even just recognizing that they're coming from a place of doing the best they can, similar to what you're describing, right? So you and I are fortunate to be doing work and to be having the kinds of conversations that we have from a place of true passion. And not everybody obviously has that opportunity. Some people are more passionate than others about their work. But even for those who maybe aren't coming from a passion perspective, just recognizing that there may be people in the room who have been around longer. There may be people in the room who have, more education than you might, or whatever the case may be. But that doesn't make you less than, right? It doesn't make you less worthy of being in the room. It doesn't make you less worthy of contributing to the conversation. And I think that's a lot of how this shows up, is that we spend so much time comparing ourselves to other people and responding to the kinds of perceived or legitimate criticisms like you're describing, right? Where someone maybe questions, what is she doing here? Or who are you to talk about these kinds of things? And if we don't come from a place of, I truly belong, I have a right to be here, and I know enough. I may not know it all, and I'll never know it all, right? But I know enough to be part of the conversation, then we are going to be so much more overwhelmed by the criticisms of others, or even just what we perceive to be criticisms of others, which may not even really be true.
Yeah, I think that's all very important to take note of. And when I was younger, I read in a book that nobody can make you feel inferior unless you give them permission. And that, I mean, and I was young, like, I mean, this is grade probably 4, something like that, like young, but it stuck with me. And obviously it's easier said than done, right? But you have to remember that no matter what goes on in your mind, when you try to interpret what somebody has said, you can never truly know 100% what they meant by it. So a lot of the times you're actually battling your own demons with the translation that that your experience and your interpretation has given to you. And, you know, unless you ask them straight up, which is what I do a lot. If someone, and it's hard, and it takes a lot of training and strength in your mentality and your stance to say, what did you mean by that? And you'll be so surprised, because when your peacock feathers go up and you feel threatened because someone said something to you that your brain has interpreted as a threat, when you ask them to explain that to you, first of all, a lot of times they're very caught off guard because people don't usually ask that. But when they explain back to you what they meant by that, I've never, like, it's so rare to me that someone actually meant it in the way that my brain interpreted it. So we have to remember that we're often our own worst enemy, and not to take things too seriously or personally.
I love that too. I think that's such an important skill or act of bravery, shall we call it, to actually question somebody in the moment. Because like you said, I think we are much more likely to view something through a more negative lens than it is that someone else is going to have malicious intent in the moment. Although there certainly are people out there who are, not supportive, but I think that's far more a reflection on them than it is on us, right? And so if someone comes into the room and tries to make us feel less than, tries to criticize or bring us down, it's a really hard, it's a hard mindset to adopt, especially when you're faced with that initial emotional response. But that is that person's baggage, right? That has nothing to do with you. And how we choose to respond to that is far more important than anything that particular individual does. And asking that question for clarification, right? What did you mean by that? Is such a powerful way to get more information to help you better process it. And also perhaps to keep the other person in check, right? They don't expect you to do that, right? So I'm sure it's a humbling experience for them too.
Somebody told me, well, my brother-in-law, he said to me, you know, Cece, when you first started doing this being asking people what they meant, because I realized I was always on the defense. He said it was really intimidating, but he said he'd come to, really appreciate it about me, because when you first try, it's like your first steps. You're not going to be perfect. It might come out a little bit crass or ugly. What did you mean by that? But you'll get used to it, and then it becomes more compassionate, and then it's a sense of playful learning, observing what, you're putting yourself out there to others and what they're experiencing of you. And it's really this kind of profound way to learn about yourself. So then it sounds more like, oh, what did you mean by that? And to take it another step further in your evolution of finding your worth and your value is then telling them what you thought. That is bearing your soul out there. That's brave. You know what I thought that you meant? I thought you meant that I didn't belong here. I thought that you meant that I didn't deserve that promotion. Like that, I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that that's another step that helps you in your evolution, just to see the world in a huge light. And for me, it's really helped me understand what I'm bringing to the world, what I'm showing up as. And that, I guess, can go inside and then accumulate in my own brain's interpretation, my value and worth and all of those things.
I think that's so powerful because it does reveal how much we do misinterpret. And I've said before that I love how Brene Brown says the story I'm telling myself, because just by framing it that way, it acknowledges the fact that it indeed is a story and not a fact, right? And so what you're describing is similar in that you're saying, by asking the question, what do you mean by that? You are acknowledging the fact that you may be misinterpreting it, right? That it's not, that your initial response is not factual. It was an interpretation, and seeking clarity on that is a really powerful way to remind yourself that your beliefs aren't always true, right? And then to then counter that with because what I thought you meant was, is such a great way for us to all connect more deeply. I think we all have these sort of arbitrary walls that we put up, sometimes because the environment makes it unsafe to let our guards down, but also because we have these expectations of how we're supposed to behave. And if we let our guards down and engage in the kind of conversation that you're describing here, right, we give permission to other people to do the same thing. And the more that we let people into these thoughts, the more we really do understand and connect with others. It's not based on these, very distant interpretations that again aren't rooted in reality.
Yes, 100%. I mean, because that's where valuation comes from. And like, to me, that is exactly how, if you value yourself, where that imposter syndrome comes from is these weird stackings and these, little, like winner panels, like who's on first place and who's on second and who's on third. And all of that is your brain just creating this mess for you to have to decipher when you're going out into the world. And when you start to interact with that, and when you go back and you see, why do I think this way, and what brought me here, and why, when I hear this, does it sound like this, even though someone's told me that's not what it was at all. And when you just investigate all that and observe yourself, then I think that there's real room to feel like you own where you are and who you are and what you're doing, and that imposter tends to go away.
I love this so much. I think this is such a great strategy to share, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to come here and tell your story. What motivated you to want to tell your story today? What do you hope people will take away from it?
Well, my whole mission started, I didn't know what I was doing, why I was feeling called to share this information. And I feel that at the end of it, that all of the weird or emotional or challenging or traumatic experiences that I have been through are being called to be shared so that I can help other people. And I look back and I think, what if I had this information before, how would it have changed my life? And I think if I could share the information that I have now and it could help other people's lives, then maybe that's what it's meant for. And that's what I feel so strongly passionate about, is helping other people be strengthened in their positions, because you don't want to live a life where you're feeling like a ghost, where you don't feel that you belong, and you have all of these circumstances and thought processes that are pulling at you so that you feel left out or that you don't belong or undeserving. That's not a fulfilled life. And I really believe that because I've been there, and because I was fortunate enough to end up on a path that got me here, where I've, traversed a lot of it, that it's, kind of like my gift or whatever that I have been given, this beautiful experience to share to others. And so that's why I reached out to you, because I felt that there was a story that I hope could help inspire other people to, to maybe use some of these techniques that I've mentioned to break out of that thought process for themselves and just, be inspired to know that you belong.
Your story is such a powerful example of why I wanted to do this podcast in the first place, because I think there's so much value to those listening to hear your very honest story about, how you have become stronger, how you have found your own value and self-worth over time. And I think hopefully it helps you too to be able to tell the story, because I think that just as we're talking about, just sharing some of these things out loud makes such a difference in our own experience of it too. A lot of times we carry these things around with us, and just getting them out there outside of our heads is really liberating as well. So I'm just really, really grateful to you for being here today, for being willing to be vulnerable and tell your story to us. And I'm sure everyone's going to take great value from it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for, giving me the opportunity to be here with you. And yeah, I really do hope that anybody listening, I hope that this, strikes something in you, and that, that you feel less alone, I guess, in the process.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it with other women who can benefit from this conversation. Before we go, I want to share some additional resources with you. If you struggle with imposter syndrome and you want to manage it more effectively, I invite you to join my free Impostor Syndrome online challenge. Every day for 7 days, you'll get an email with self-reflection questions and exercises to help you better understand your own experience with imposter syndrome and how to navigate it more effectively. To join the free challenge, visit executivekareersuccess.com/imposter-syndrome-challenge. When you sign up, you'll immediately receive your first message. Also, if you're interested in joining a community of women who engage in candid conversations that generally aren't happening elsewhere, I invite you to join my Leading Women discussion group. On the first and third Thursday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern, we meet virtually over Zoom to talk about questions or challenges related to career management, leadership development, and any other relevant topics such as imposter syndrome and confidence. It's always a great discussion with a great group of women. If you want to check it out, you're welcome to be my guest on a future call. Just reach out to me at kim@executivekareersuccess.com, and I will share the call details with you. And if you want to join my newsletter to receive tips, insights, and updates, text Leading Women, all one word, to 66866. Finally, consider telling us your story. Contact me to learn more about how you can be a guest on the Impostor Syndrome Files. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.